We're very excited to have Letitia England here from CTLT to talk to us today about usability testing and user experience. She's a UX professional with over 10 years of experience in both the public and private sectors. And I first connected with her because I was trying to suss out some UX details for a grant proposal that I was working on with a faculty member around. And then I thought, oh, she's got some interesting stuff here. I think other people might be interested too. So she very graciously agreed to come and chat with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to her.
Yeah, so I am technically a user experience and user interface analyst with CTLT, which is kind of a long title to say I try to make learning applications easier for people to use. And usability testing is one of the ways that we do that. And it's something I'm really passionate about, and I love talking about it. So my email is here. It's also at the end of these slides. I'm happy to talk to people one-on-one if there's particular use cases that you have in mind. But for today, we will do just a general overview. I can advance this. So what usability testing is and is not, why it matters for different projects that you're on, what does a typical time frame look like, and how you can do it. So I always start with what usability testing is not, because there's a lot of confusion I find with people have a certain idea of what they think it is, and I always want to articulate that a little bit more. So one thing it isn't is user acceptance testing. So you may have heard this term, or you may have just seen this done. So it's a general concept where there's a group of stakeholders who are interested in whatever it is you're making. And so once it gets to a point where you have a prototype that they can play around with, you send it out and you just get general feedback. So they play around with it and then they kind of self-report things that they find. Another approach to this is quality assurance testing. So this is a little bit more directed at actually trying to break whatever it is that you're making. So it's typically done by a development team, but it can also be done by stakeholders. And again, those folks are going to be self-testing and self-reporting to you what they find. So the way that usability testing is different, these are images of what usability testing looks like. I call it the magical triangle. So there's always 3 points. There's a person who's testing, there's a product that you're testing, and then there's an observer who's watching. So the key thing here is that there's someone watching the person use whatever the product is. And the reason that's important is that what people say they do and what they actually do are often very different things. One example of this that comes up a lot is contact forms. If you're filling out a contact form, you might go through all the fields, hit submit, and you didn't fill in a required field. So you get an error about that. It drops all the content that you put into the contact form. Now you have to fill it out again. Now you say, okay, I know this field is required, so I'm going to fill it in. You go to hit submit. Well, turns out that that required field, you didn't enter it in the right way. Maybe it was a phone number. You didn't format it the way that the contact form wanted you to. So again, you've lost all your information. You fill it in again. You finally hit submit. It goes through. And now you're like, great, I did that. I accomplished that task. You might not think to report to the development team of these errors that happen, in part because people will blame themselves for it, or they'll just think in the end, you know, I got that done, so there's nothing for me to talk about. But really, those are all things that are really valuable for us to know about on a development team. And so, yeah, you're just removing that self-reporting aspect. And so that's why usability testing is different than these other forms of testing, and that's where the power of it comes from. So a few more things that it isn't. So once I explain what usability testing is, it's this magical triangle. You're watching someone use something that you made. There's kind of this excitement that builds for some folks, and then they think that this is going to be solving lots of other issues that it maybe doesn't. So the first thing is people think that it's going to validate something that they've done. So they'll say, okay, I'm going to add usability testing the last 2 days of the project that I have. I'm just going to throw that out in the end. We're going to test it, and we're going to say, great, look at us. We got user feedback. But unfortunately, that doesn't leave time to actually add that user feedback back into the project. So the industry saying is we don't test to see what a good job we did, we test to do a good job. So this is how we're getting feedback that then informs kind of an iterative design process. And there's also sometimes a sense that we're going to test everything under the sun, that we're going to be able to actually ask people, you know, how useful do you think this product is going to be in the future? And you can certainly ask those sort of questions in usability testing, but this sort of testing is much better for concrete things about how easy is it to do this thing with this particular product. So why does this matter? Why do I care about this, and why are you here? This is sort of my breakdown of why I think usability testing matters. The first thing is that you're kind of in this development bubble when you make any sort of product. So there's stakeholders, there's the people who are working on development, there might be researchers or designers, and everybody's spending a lot of time thinking about this one thing, and they're all sitting with each other, and they're making decisions together, and everybody starts to speak the same language, and everybody's using the same thing over and over and over, and they're starting to think, you know, this is really easy to use, this is really intuitive. It's kind of an inevitable thing that happens in any product. So when we bring in other people from outside to look at what we've made, we're bringing in those outside voices, and we're revealing kind of those blind spots that we don't even know that we have when we're developing something. So an example of this from my work, one of my favorite examples is I was working on an application for inspecting tomatoes out in the field. So people would bring out tablets with them, they would fill out these forms. And so there was one thing that we had in our usability testing where we asked them, well, let's say that there was really bad weather and you're not able to do this inspection, how would you report that in the application? And so on the screen, there was this giant red button that said cancel. So we thought, well, everybody's going to know to hit cancel. Nobody did in all of our usability testing. And it turned out that it was because the people who were on the ground doing the inspections, there was a communication gap between them and the people who were actually communicating what we needed to do with the app. And their training told them, you don't ever cancel an inspection. These are government mandated things. You always have to reschedule. So we actually had a rescheduling feature that was part of that application after you hit the cancel button. So it was really just a matter of rewording that and presenting it in a different way. But that was just such an important part of breaking outside of this bubble because we wouldn't have known that unless we had gone to the users and actually had them look at what we were making. So you're getting these outside voices and you're getting multiple ones. So typically a qualitative study is going to involve 5 to 10 different people. They're all going to be testing the same thing. And because of that, just like in any sort of research, you're going to start to see patterns of interaction. So what are the things that are easier for people to do and what are the things that are more difficult for them to do? And why this matters is that this is how we create what's called user-friendly design, because we're actually finding what works for the majority, what doesn't work for them. And that's much more powerful than just listening to the loudest voices in the room, which is often what can happen again within that development bubble. You might have people who are more opinionated or they have stronger personalities, and so they can start dictating the design in a way that's not helpful for the actual user. So again, another example from my own experience is when I was working on there's a UBC project where basically there are a series of search boxes that people were going to use in doing research. And so the stakeholders had bought actually a third-party software to run the main search. So of course they wanted to use that name, similar as how we talk about Google. You know, we're going to Google something. They said, oh, well, we're going to use this third-party vendor name to label that search box. Well, our development team didn't think that was a good idea, but we took it out and we usability tested it, and sure enough, people didn't understand what that was because they weren't familiar with it the way they were with Google. So then our development team said, well, we have a great idea. We're going to go out and we're going to call this the all search box because it's the main thing that people are going to search in, and there are other ways that they can dig down deeper. So we went out and we tested that. That also didn't do well. The reason being that the users thought that because it was the only thing that they ever needed to search in. They never had to explore the other search boxes or search options that were available. So it was just a really good example of how we got user feedback that informed us of things that the stakeholders didn't know and we didn't know, but the majority couldn't tell us what that was, what was the best design. So in the end, we ended up labeling it as the general box instead of calling it all, because then users understood that, okay, I can start here, but if I'm not finding what I'm looking for, there are other places I can go and look. And so when we're using data-driven design, we're ending up improving the user experience. So user experience is kind of a broader umbrella that encompasses usability. So usability is one piece of this. But user experience is really about our relationship between humans and the products that they use, that whole experience. And so why this matters is people don't always limit their frustrations with things to the technology itself. And one way that I see that in my work is, so I work with learning applications, and you're probably aware, being at UBC, that there's student evaluations of teaching that students do at the end of term. And so these are a very big deal. And the scores of these student evaluations of teaching can be really impacted by a bad user experience with technology, because students don't always know, like, oh, it was the technology that made this frustrating to learn. They might think it was the content, or it was the delivery, it was the instructor, it was the course. So it kind of all gets lumped in there, and there's a real ripple effect when there's bad usability. So it's really important that we're thinking about the user experience and having a better relationship there. And so ultimately, having that better user experience, having better usability, it clears a path to whatever it is that you really want to achieve. Because we're not typically making products just to make products. There's something else that we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to take action or to learn something. And so when usability gets in the way of these things, that larger thing doesn't happen. But when we do have good user experience, when we do have good usability, it has that potential to expand the impact and reach of whatever it is we're making or whatever it is that we're trying to do. So again, from my experience, there's an application that is in development right now where there are a bunch of data scientists who got together and said, you know, we have all this data on research that's being done at the university, so we want to make a tool that kind of shows what are some of the projects that have been done in the past, what are some of the methods that have been used, just something that people can reference so that, you know, when they're thinking about designing their own project, they can see what's come before them. So the team got together. They were all data scientists, so they all had very advanced understanding of like quantitative methods, and they put together these amazing visualizations that no one understood. So this tool, I was brought in at the very end because, you know, again, we tacked that onto the end. So I was able to help them with some of the language that they used or the layout, the filters, and things like that. But the visualizations were done. And so that tool really has had no uptake because people can't use it. They know that it's valuable, they want to do something with it and interact with it, but the usability is preventing them from achieving that higher goal. So this is my summary of why this matters. So usability testing is letting you break outside of that development bubble, which adds those outside voices to your product. Having those outside voices lets you know what does it mean to use data-driven design, so you can apply more user-friendly patterns of interaction for the actual users that are going to be using your product. That all leads into improving the overall user experience and allows people to have a better relationship with your product. Because they're having that good relationship and that communication is really clear there, they can achieve those higher targets, which increases your product's potential impact and reach, which I think is really powerful.
So is it okay to have a conversation with you?
Sure.
So I think that's a great summary of why usability matters. I just had a dialogue with, well, it was more of a unilogue, with Shirt today because I was putting in a report on the project that I did. And when I tried to preview the report, none of the information that I typed in was there in the preview. Okay. So I sent an email to Shirt and said, okay, it's supposed to be the support group. So I sent an email and said, okay, so none of this stuff is there, so I'm not happy to submit my report because I can't see it. So I can't preview it, and I don't even know if it's there. So anyway, this started a cascade of email communication, which essentially was, oh, well, here's your report. If you're okay with it, go ahead and submit it. They created a PDF file with me, but I still wasn't okay with it because there were some technological glitches. But those are glitches I have no control over because that was a system internal glitch. Right? Mm-hmm. So then I got 4 more emails today saying, well, you know, we're going to kick down the road, and eventually it got kicked to, well, that's not really our responsibility. We've sent that out to a third party. And so you need to communicate with the third party about, because we contracted this out, about what the problem is with the report. So this is all great in the sense that they got my feedback, but at the end of the day, they didn't really plan to do anything with it. They just planned to ask whoever they subcontracted this out to have a dialogue with me. And by now, I'm at the point where I don't really care. I'm submitting my report because you can sort out your own internal problems with your reporting structure. So I don't know if that's an example of poor usability, but it seems to me it is.
Yeah, and it's something that I run into because I also will work with third-party tools as part of my job. So a lot of what I'm talking about, it's very easy to apply this when it is an in-house product because we have control over the code and I have access to the development team and I can go talk to them and try to convince them these things need to be fixed. But I also do evaluations of learning technologies that are not UBC technologies, and so it is very frustrating to communicate with vendors around that. And our approach has really been around documentation and training for our support staff more than anything. When we find usability issues that we can't fix, it's about supporting our support staff and supporting the users because, yeah, it can just end in an endless loop of trying to tell someone your problem and find someone who can listen. Yeah.
And actually, that's quite valuable information for me because I was just in meetings with district representatives about some of our systems, and some of the feedback we heard about complaints with their systems is that there is a new system coming down the pipeline, and so their budgets have been frozen on fixing the current system because the money's all going towards the new system.
Oh my
So
Lord.
I not that that's helpful to you now, but you're not the only one that's complaining about it, and they do know they have huge problems and their hands are tied because they're not allowed to spend money, like, stop-gapping right now. Anyways, I will forward that feedback to them about the report.
What is the state of the field for adaptive user interfaces? So my work is in like virtual reality simulation, and I know that a lot of older students versus younger students have different capacities when it comes to standard user interfaces with technology. And I was wondering if there's like separate usability testing done when you have an interface that can adapt to someone's like learning needs and like simplify things for people that may not understand the complex tool.
I wouldn't say that separate testing is done, but it's always good to have a sense of who your user base is because you want to make sure you're testing with that variation, like across that spectrum. So you might have slightly different tasks that you give, and I'm going to get into in this next section about writing tasks and how that works. But you might have tasks that are for the more basic users who just have very simple things they want to do, and then more advanced ones that would be for advanced users. And then when you're recruiting people, you would have a sense of who's going to fall into each bucket. But you're basically going to test the same things. You just might go a little bit more in depth. That would be my approach anyway. Anything else? So, how can you run your own usability testing? So this is how I break down how it can all work. This time frame can also be super compressed and happen within the course of a week if you have people who are really on board with it and you have access to your users and you can get things set up pretty quick. So it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. So I'll go into each of these a little more in depth, but just at a high level, the first thing you're going to do is identify those core goals. So what are the main things that people should be able to do with the product that you're testing? And again, you can have the more simple things or the more advanced things. You're going to document all of that, and you're going to write down everything that you're doing for your test. And this is helping to get everybody on the same page, but it's also helping with being able to repeat the test, perhaps in a week or a month or 2 years, or even just to tell someone what you did. It's really important to have that documentation. You're going to coordinate users who are going to use this thing, a testable product, and a facilitator, again, creating that magical triangle, and then somewhere for all that testing to take place. You're going to conduct your testing, making sure that you're recording everything under the sun that you can think of that's going to be important in informing what you're going to do with your design of your product. And then, as with all research, you can review your outcomes and determine what you learned. And what's always great is if you're able to iterate here, create that iterative design process and just go from analyzing results to fixing something, then go right back to scheduling testing with new users and try it again, just to test if the changes you're making are actually an improvement or not. But if you don't have time to do that, please don't let that deter you, because just getting 5 people to look at what you've made and give feedback on that is still super valuable. So in terms of identifying core goals, so you're going to think about what are the main things that people need to be able to do with this product. For some things it's going to be really easy because there's going to be a limited amount of options anyway, but for others it might be a 100-page website. So there's going to be a lot of options. You're going to have to really think with your team, What are the main things that we really want to test and make sure someone can do? For each one, you're going to say, here's our higher level goal, but then you're going to take that and rewrite that into one or more tasks that you're actually going to hand someone to do without any training. So it's got to be written in a way that is going to be relatable to them. It's going to be the way that they're thinking about something if they were coming at it on their own without being part of your testing. And so the example I give here is, let's say that you had a weight tracking app where someone can maybe record food that they eat, the exercise they do, and where their weight is at. So one of the goals would obviously be people should be able to track their weight in this application. But then we're going to turn that into 2 different tasks at a minimum. You might do more depending on what are the different ways you can do this. But earlier in the test, you're going to have somebody do a task in which they enter their starting weight, and then later they're going to enter a weight change. And some important things to note about writing tasks. The first is that you don't want to be too leading. So if in the interface I had something that actually said starting weight, there's a big heading, or that's actually the title of the button, I don't actually want to use that language in my task, because what you'll find users will do is they'll try to find, like, that's the easiest way for them to finish that task, is to go, oh, it says starting weight, I'm going to look for exactly those words. We want to really, get them to that next level of thinking about what it is that they're doing. So I might call it like enter even just your initial weight, just any way that we change that wording so that they have to think a little more, we have to test our interface a little bit better. And the second thing is, if there's a series of steps leading up to something. So let's say that the second item, if I have to enter my weight change, maybe I first have to click over here, then I have to go into a menu, and there's a drop down, and there's a series of steps. We don't want to let the user know that at all. So I would still give them this exact same task. We don't want to give them any heads up about, now click to this screen and then enter your weight. We want to make sure that they can get there on their own, because that's how they're going to be navigating that application or product without you there in the natural environment. So you're going to document all that stuff. Make sure you're writing down what are the goals and how are we going about testing them. You're going to write down who you're testing with, what are the demographics of your audience, what are you testing exactly? Are there parts of the application you've chosen not to test, and why is that? Are you on a particular version of something, and what version is it? Where and when will you test, and also how you will test. And part of this is articulating whether or not that observer who's going to sit and watch these people do this, are they going to intervene at any point? Is there any reason that they would need to jump in and say, well, actually, I don't want you to go over to this part of the website right now. It's not fully developed, or anything like that. Or sometimes we'll do data resets, where we'll want someone to always start from the home page of a website so that they're not somewhere else and then navigating away from that. We always want to reset them. It just depends on the particular test that you're running. And the importance of the test plan is, again, as I said earlier, documenting what you did so that you can repeat it in the future, or you can explain to someone the decisions that you've made. And it's also good to get everybody on the same page. So you're creating that shared understanding of what it is that you are testing. Everybody's in agreement. And a key piece of this is the metrics that you're going to use. So typical metrics of usability testing will be things like time on task. How long did it take someone to do something? How many clicks did they make? Especially if it's a website, they're navigating around, there's a certain number of clicks that is like the minimum. And then things like success and failure. So if I go back to this previous task, it could be that, and it's very likely that a user will get to the second task and say, I already entered my weight somewhere, and I know exactly where to go to do that. They might go back to that initial place where they put in their first weight. But that might not actually be where you want them to be. There might be a totally different function for entering weight changes. So you need to have agreement on the team that that is going to be a failure. That's, even if they record that their weight has changed, that you're not going to record that as success. Or if it is valid, and if there are multiple ways to do something, there's multiple ways to achieve something, document what those multiple ways are so that everybody understands. And there are also validated questionnaires out there. So if you're interested in kind of seeing other people, like what they've come up with in terms of asking about usability, there's lots of documentation on this. We often use the System Usability Scale, or SUS, at CTLT. It's a 10-question questionnaire in which you basically calculate something at the end that gives you a score. So you're having like a firm number that you can compare against, and that can be especially helpful if you want to test something over time as it evolves. It's also really important, once you have a test plan in place, to test your test plan. So you want a usability test or usability test. It sounds kind of weird, but it's funny how the things, again, within that development bubble, when everybody's talking about how are we going to test this, everybody's in agreement, it all makes sense, but then you put a user in front of it, and something about your test itself is confusing to them. It's not even the interface, it's just the test itself. So it's always helpful to do that, and it doesn't have to be directly with the audience you have in mind. It can be with a colleague or a coworker or friend, family member. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of having someone go through that process. And part of that is also allowing you to test to make sure that everything is achievable. So especially if your product isn't fully done, or if there's data that you need to have in the application in order for people to do something, but because it's a test environment, maybe that data is not there, you're going to surface those issues when you do your practice run. So in scheduling testing, there are a number of considerations. So as I was mentioning, thinking about your test data. Do you have a test site? Do you have a test login? This is all for technology sort of things. You don't have to have your product fully done. You don't even have to have it developed. Like, you can do usability testing with paper prototypes. You can do them with mock-ups. It's just a matter of developing your test plan around what it is that you want to be testing. And your testing can be done in a number of different ways. So you can do it in a private space, so just making one-on-one time with someone. They can come to you, or it's always really helpful if you can go to them, especially if it's something that they'd be doing on their own workstation anyway. It can make it a little bit more natural. You can do it in a public space. We call this guerrilla style, where we're just recruiting people on the fly. So at CTL2, we frequently do it in the Learning Center. We set up a booth, and we have giant chocolate bars, and students are always happy to give us 10 minutes of their time to test something in exchange for a chocolate bar. And you can also do this online. So there's a lot of paid services that are out there. So you would go through the same process of writing out your test plan, and then when you get into these online sites, they'll ask you for some sort of URL that people can access, and then they'll ask you to give them your tasks. So you'll tell people what to do. And then when people do it, they record themselves, and they record their screen, and they'll talk out loud, because that's part of this process, is trying to get users to talk out loud. So it'll be like you're there. It's not as good as being there, because you can't really ask the follow-up questions and things that might come to mind, but you'll still be able to do that observation. That's an important part of usability testing. And then you'll do your testing. So there's a number of different ways that you can record testing if that's something that you're interested in, and there's more and more advanced applications for doing this. So you can have eye tracking software that's seeing where people's eyes are going. You can have heat maps that show where people's mouths or fingers are moving. Or you can just use a screen capture software like Camtasia, or you can just record audio, or you can record nothing at all. I really don't think that it matters too much how you record things, and I always want to emphasize that with people, that the technology isn't as important as you and your eyeballs looking at something and seeing what's happening. So the important thing is just that you have a good view of what's going on, or whoever's doing the observing does, and that you always take notes, because even if you're recording something, things can go wrong with your recording, so it's good to have that paper copy. In testing, you always want to stress with the user that you're testing the design of the product and not them. Users will typically be very nervous in testing. It's just a natural, like, oh, I'm here and you're going to watch me use this thing, and I'm going to feel a little self-conscious about it. So that's always really important, and just as with any research that you do, staying neutral is really important, making people feel appreciated, respected, and heard. And one key piece of this is, of course, incentives. So again, chocolate bars or anything else to make people feel that you really appreciate them taking the time. And then, of course, once you're done, you're going to look at the trends experienced by the majority, looking for things that worked well and didn't work so well. You want to at least wait until you get to that magic 5 number of users before you start doing this. I know that some people get really excited after they've met with 2 users and, oh, okay, they both made the same error and let's go fix it and then continue usability testing, but it's better to just kind of wait to see what happens once you get through your full session. But it's also important to consider valuable insights that come from individuals. So if you had 1 out of 10 people did something different than everybody else, but that one thing that they did led to a huge miscommunication about something, or it prevented them from being able to do something in the application, it's also important to consider that. And of course, if you can fix and iterate and go through the process another time, that's ideal. But again, if you don't have time for that, that's perfectly fine. And when in doubt, consult. There's a million resources out there for doing usability testing. These are just a few of my favorites. Measuring U is a site that's a lot about the quantitative side of usability testing, if that's something you're interested in. The Nielsen Norman Group has been around forever. They are industry leaders, and they have lots of research that they publish. Some of it's for free, some of it you need to pay to access. User Experience Professionals Association has a magazine in which they have peer-reviewed articles that are really interesting about the different research that's going on in user experience more broadly. And UX Matters is a great resource just for user experience more broadly. They cover usability, but they also cover other things like personas or journey mapping, focus groups, all these different ways of getting user feedback beyond just usability. I also brought with me a couple of books. If anybody wants to look at these later, they are Steve Krug. He's written a book called Don't Make Me Think, which is an often usability book in general, but this is his take on usability testing. It's rocket surgery made easy. And then there's the Moderator Survival Guide. So if you are doing usability testing yourself, this is a fantastic book with like all different sorts of situations that you might run into and ways of dealing with that. So the final point I want to make is selling usability testing. I know that this is something I run into a lot in my work, is that people are very reluctant. They kind of think that usability testing is this nice to have. We'll put it in this pile in the corner. Maybe if we have time, we'll get to it. And so a lot of my work is advocating for this and trying to get people to do it. So these are the sort of points that I make. First of all, anyone can do it. I have experience doing this for many years, but it doesn't make me super different from anyone else in this room, because if you guys sat down and watched somebody do a usability test, you'd also be able to pick up on a lot of the things that people are struggling with. And so the important thing is just getting that magical triangle, which is not hard to do. It's not hard to get the product, someone to use it, and someone to watch them. As I mentioned with the time frame, it's easy to do this in a short time frame. Like as long as you just get everybody organized, you get everybody on the same page, you can get up and running and have testing done within the course of a week. And it's also really inexpensive. So, you know, you can incentivize it however you want. A lot of times it's easy to find people who want to participate because they have some sort of interest in whatever it is that you're making naturally. And it's really good return on investment because you get 5 people to sit in front of something, you find some issues with it, and you're able to fix that, and that enhances your user experience, it makes happier users, and it potentially increases your impact of what it is you're making. And then, of course, my biggest point is always, if you are making something for other people to use, you should make sure other people can actually use it before you put it into the wild. So what else, otherwise, what's the point of all that effort that goes into making what you're making? So that is it for me. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. And again, if you want to reach out about any particular projects down the road, I'm happy to do that too. Have conversations later on.
Any common mistakes that people that have just sort of started doing this tend to make?
You mean in usability testing?
Yeah, usability testing. Like, what are like some of the common sort of pitfalls or mistakes that people make when they start out?
I would definitely say there's a desire for people who are new to it to want the user to tell them how to fix the problems that they find. So, and I've seen that stress people out. Like, users don't want to be asked, right? They're there to do the testing, and then they're like, okay, great, I did that. But when you look at them and then say, and how would you fix that? That kind of freaks them out a bit. So I think that that's a thing to definitely be aware of, is that that's kind of what your team needs to decide. You take that information and you make the decisions about how to make improvements.
How often and how many times would you usually go about doing usability testing in a fairly simple type of project?
That's That's a good question. Sometimes it'll be something that you learn as you go. So if you do testing the first time and there's a bunch of things that go wrong, so you go and fix them, you go back the second time. If it goes really well, you might find that that kind of answers your questions, and so that was enough. Sometimes the second time around, you'll find that a change that you made actually highlights a different problem that you weren't aware of, so you might need to go back a third time. But I would say typically I'm not finding that I go through testing beyond that third time.
And one other more pragmatic question. In thinking about the writing of your ethics applications, do you leave it open in that sense that you may go through a few different cycles so that you may have X number of people at the end who you anticipate you'll be recruiting?
I'm lucky that I don't have to do ethics for this. So we're typically doing more of a quality assurance testing. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
I'll figure it out.
You mentioned people like don't leave it to the end, but I wonder, and you talked about some products that are in partial development and you're starting usability. Is there a too early, or is there a nice happy medium spot, kind of the sweet spot? Because I can see where, like, I don't know, you're still kind of, don't leave it to the end, but how early do you start, I guess is my question.
So it really depends on, like, if the thing that you want to test can be tested earlier or not. So an example of this might be with a website. If you're developing a website, you just want to know, are people going to know with my website's hierarchy that they're going to click here, 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 here to get to this thing? You actually don't even need a website for that. You can just have cards or something that represent different areas of the website, and you can say, okay, here's your options right now. Where would you go to find this information and to see what they'll point to or click on? So for that sort of stuff, you can do it as soon as you know what you think those categories are going to be. But for other things, like if there's a form that you need to edit and there's a certain way that you need to edit that form, you're going to have an editable form, right? So it really depends on, you could come up with the tasks very early and then see which of these might be something that can be tested before we have a fully functional prototype and which might have to wait. But yeah, I wouldn't say there is a sweet spot. Just depends on what you're testing. Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned is that like one of the functions of testing usability is to ensure that the majority of users can use your tool. Is usability testing informed by like equity at all in terms of ensuring that like some groups aren't unable to use the tool in the way that you want them to? Like, is that part of the consideration of usability testing if like a specific population isn't able to use your tool and you tap for that?
I guess I'm not sure what you mean.
So let's say you have a web page that you want people to be able to navigate to, I don't know, improve their sleep, and it has sleep resources and such. But let's imagine that when you look at the demographic of your website users, that none of them are accessing certain types of information on those preferences.
I think that would be much more a question of preferences. But if you know what that group is that you're worried about, I would specifically recruit that group and do testing with them to make sure that that's not part of the issue. But yeah, what I found in doing this work is that there really isn't a difference. Like, we used to record a lot more demographics when we go out with the students and we'd say, okay, you know, what are the things we want to capture about this person that's going to somehow inform the usability of this website? And we found that there just we weren't finding any correlations there, right? So the main thing that makes a difference actually is the students, what discipline that they're in, or like what their major is and what year they're in. So just kind of, those were the things that seem to matter the most. As long as we're reaching across disciplines, we're reaching across years, and the things we were making seem to really resonate with most people. So
I asked if we had any questions from our online audience, and we just had the comment that there was lots of great information, and thanks for making it available online. So unless there's more questions from our live audience in person, I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us today, and again, making your contact information available in case that there's any follow-up questions around specific projects. So thank you again.
Yeah,